long answer to your short question is what qualifies me as results.
Today's guest is Edmeades. Now, he's a remarkable entrepreneur whose journey from homeless teenager to successful business leader is really inspiring.
And so the drug companies turned all the psychiatrists into drug dealers, and it wasn't what they wanted to do.
Now, he's really well known for his health and wellness program, WILDFIT, which we're going to discuss today.
The minute somebody's got some kind of a anxiety problem or depression problem, we just write them a script. We say, oh, well, here's a drug that can solve that. It doesn't solve the problem at all. It distracts you from it for a while, or it numbs it for a while, but you're just post-dating a check. You know, you're going to have to pay it eventually.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the podcast in partnership with our awesome sponsor, Megaverse. More about them later. Today's guest is Edmeades. Now, he's a remarkable entrepreneur whose journey from homeless teenager to successful business leader is really inspiring. His story is proof that anyone can overcome adversity and achieve great things. Now, he's really well known for his health and wellness program, WILDFIT, which we're going to discuss today, and his Business Freedom Initiative, where he empowers entrepreneurs globally. In this episode, we're going to explore Eric's journey from his early struggles to his success in business, as well as his insights on leadership and personal growth. But more importantly, how we can overcome our illnesses, our obesity, our challenges that we have mentally with the understanding of food, air, and water, and how we use it. So let's talk about the Megaverse, the Internet of People. Shaping the next iteration of the Internet, Megaverse is powered by revolutionary blockchain technology built on decentralized community ownership. It offers users, brands, and businesses a seamless, regulated, and transparent opportunity for growth, revenue, and community building. Megaverse is accelerating user adoption and achieving these goals through multiple verticals like Megachain, a high-performance blockchain for tamper-proof transactions, Megafile system for encrypted decentralized storage, and Mega Studio, which democratizes development through collaborative and AI elements. Organizations across industries like Dubai Multi-Commodities Center, Dubai World Trade Center, and Ras Al Khaimah government have already explored the lucrative potential of a Megaverse presence. Megaverse enables users to create a Web3 future for the people where technology serves human purposes. Dive in and discover the Internet of People with Megaverse today. Eric, thanks so much for coming to join us on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So I suppose the first question I've got to ask you, and even though it's probably, I've got an unfair advantage here because I've consumed quite a bit of your content, but what for everybody else qualifies you to talk about mental health and food?
Well, it starts, I guess, there's a couple layers. The first layer is that I was suffering with all those things. Like when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was really not well. And I'd been to see all kinds of specialists, and I was on all kinds of prescription medications. I was having surgery prescribed. Like there was all these solutions that were being thrown at me and none of them were solving them. And I was inspired to study food. Somebody suggested to me that maybe food had something to do with this. And so I did a little experiment, and 30 days later, I'd lost 35 pounds and every symptom I had gone away. And that started me on a major journey, and a journey that I don't think I could have solved except for a bunch of intersections. My great-grandfather had found the oldest Homo sapiens skull in history, so I'd grown up with a real fascination about sub-Saharan African ecology and archaeology. Then I'd had this nutrition thing, and then on top of that, I'd gotten involved in coaching and developing transformative content. And so as a consequence of my curiosity and those three disciplines, I was able to create something that was disruptive in what you might call the diet space. I don't think of us as being in the diet space because our clients never go on a diet again. And so I think that maybe the short answer to this long answer to your short question is what qualifies me as results. We created a program that has a significantly higher completion rate than almost any other program and a higher efficacy rate. We have countless cases of type 2 diabetes reversals, dramatic weight loss, fertility where there was none, and those results speak for themselves.
when we talk about mental health, it's nowadays, I mean, you and I are probably not too dissimilar in age, but when we were younger, that wasn't a term that existed. I mean, depression did as a term, but mental health wasn't discussed. Now it's discussed, to me, almost so much that you try and define what it really is. But invariably, if you take it into the corporate space, people talk about burnout and they talk about stress, that being overworked and uninspired and stuff like that. And it's kind of like, that's where my problems lie. And they kind of hang their hat on, you know, I've got mental health problems because of these external factors. They never look at their own lifestyle and say, what part does that play? And so to give some context to that, I suppose I go to the gym every morning first thing. I drive all my Instagram followers mad with a video letting them know that I'm on my way to the gym and to get out of bed and do what they got to do. But for me, I know going to the gym means I have a better day, period.
Yeah.
And I show up at work and I have energy and I'm optimistic and I'm positive just because of that. Because I know when I don't go to the gym, I feel heavy and slow and cloudy and foggy a lot of the time. So I know that makes a difference. But I don't think I ever sat down and said to myself, what impact can food or my nutrition have on me? Now I know eat healthy and eat well and, you know, whether it's a vegan diet or a carnivore diet or whether it's keep your calories down. I know that kind of stuff has been pushed at me from a marketing perspective for many years, but I've never, and because there are so many different versions, I've never known the true impact of food on my diet, on my mental health. So
yeah.
Can you kind of shed some light around this so that we can understand this better?
Yeah, the relationship between food and mental health is so direct and so linear and so ignored. We discovered it largely by accident. So when I first created WILDFIT, when I first started coaching people, we started collecting data. And some interesting stuff happened. For example, like we never intended to say reverse diabetes, but it happened. And we didn't create the program as a weight loss program, but it turned out to be unbelievably good at that. Well, equally, in a large organic survey that we ran, the third highest reported benefit of doing the program was increased sense of well-being. And then as subsections of that, ended depression, got off my antidepressants, no longer having suicide thoughts, and so forth. Now, at no point in the program have we addressed those things directly, but the net effect is that those things improved. And there's a really good reason for it. Now, if you and I, for example, were, in New York and we were going to drive to LA, we would go look at the car and we'd make sure that the tires were good and that the brake fluid was good and that the oil had been recently changed and that there was antifreeze in the engine. We would do all those things. But we don't do that with our physical bodies. We simply eat what the food industry gives us. And we simply put the things in that are convenient and available to us. And most of us are so confused about what should be going in or shouldn't. I mean, even you're saying, well, I know there's the vegan option and the carnivore option, and then there's the, calorie restriction option. I have a little thought exercise for you. I want you to imagine that you were a teenage alien and you'd been sent down to Earth to do a homework assignment, and that is to evaluate the purpose of the diet industry. So you've done all your research now and you come back and you're giving your presentation to the class, and you would probably say something like this: well, teacher and honored alien students that are here with me, I've done my evaluation of Earth, and it seems to me that the diet industry suggests that it's there to help people lose weight, but what it's really there to do is to completely destroy their self-esteem. The diet industry is like designed to do that. We're going to give you a bunch of impossible rules. We're going to make you take away your favorite things. We're going to put you into calorie restriction, which is effectively starvation, which is unbelievably stressful. And we're going to ask you to use willpower to hold on to that. And then when you slip and you make a mistake, we're going to blame you for it because it's your fault. And you're going to have guilt and you're going to have shame. And that guilt and that shame, by the way, is going to trigger you to eat foods that you learned as a child to help you with pain. And so the cycle is going to be perpetuated, which is why on Earth, the average adult will go on 2 diets a year for their entire adult life, and they will last on each of those diets for about 7 days. That itself is a mental health problem. That damage to their self-esteem is a mental health problem, and that's before you get into the absent nutrition, the messed up metabolism, the slowed down blood sugar and all that kind of stuff. Like the link between food and mental health is absolutely direct and linear. I don't believe that any psychiatrist that if you walk in and the first thing they do is prescribe you a pill and they didn't once ask you what you're eating, that should be malpractice. The very first thing a psychiatrist should do is get your water, nutrition, breathing, and movement right.
That just makes me think so much about it. As you say that, it makes me think, well, if you put a tablet in your mouth, what is a tablet? A tablet is some shortcut chemicals. That's basically what it is. When you put food in your mouth, if it's not the right stuff, then that's probably a bunch of chemicals too.
Well, okay, if we're going to do the chemical thing, like water is a chemical. So I know what you mean, though. Okay. What you mean is a bunch of artificial chemicals. And what I would say is this, that normally pills are just a shortcut, and a shortcut with a price. You know, if you take a shortcut, there's a price. And you know what? I have a great example of when I really saw this clearly for the first time. So I had this girlfriend, and she was from Normandy. And we went on a date weekend in France and in Paris, and she said, hey, would you like to meet my parents? And I, okay, let's go do that. And we drove from Paris to Normandy. We get there. She goes, now listen, Eric, don't pick a fight with my dad. And I was like, why would I pick a fight with your dad? Well, because he's a pharmaceutical psychiatrist, and I know how you feel about that. And I'm like, look, I want him to like me. I'm not going to pick a fight with him. Everything's going to be fine. So we sit at the meal, mom, dad, girlfriend, me, and having a nice meal. And suddenly the dad goes, so Eric, he says, I Googled you, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on, psychoactive drugs in therapy. And my normal response to that, which is very tongue-in-cheek, is, well, I think for every 10,000 pills that are prescribed, maybe one was necessary. But for him and for my girlfriend, I dumbed it down by an order of magnitude. And I said, well, I think that, for every 1,000 pills that are prescribed, only one was necessary. And I'm kind of expecting girlfriend to give me the elbow, but she lets it go. And, and then he looks at me and he goes, oh no, I think it's closer to 10,000 to 1. And that started the most fascinating conversation wherein he explained to me that the trend that had really probably started in America has spread around the world. And that is that the legislation around the world was being changed by lobbyists to allow the pharmaceutical companies to advertise directly to the consumer. And so now the advertisement comes along and says, if you feel like this, you need that. And so these people are walking into the office and demanding a particular drug. And if you don't write the script, so he would say, look, why don't we just have 2 or 3 sessions? We'll see how we go. We see what progress we make. If we make good progress, maybe you don't need the drug. And they would say immediately, if you don't write me the script, I'll find somebody who will. And so the drug companies turned all the psychiatrists into drug dealers. And it wasn't what they wanted to do. And by the end of that meal, he then hired me to come and speak at a conference on psychiatry on Mont Saint-Michel, which is one of the most magical. It's beautiful. And I spoke there at a conference on psychiatry, and I did two presentations. The first presentation was on therapeutic techniques to assist people in feeling better without using drugs, because frankly, many of those people have gotten so used to just prescribing drugs that they've kind of forgotten how to solve the problem without the drugs. And then the second session they wanted me to do was on how to convince a client to be willing to give it a try without the drugs. And that's the state of the world at the moment. Like the minute somebody's got some kind of a anxiety problem or a depression problem, we just write them a script. We say, oh, well, here's a drug that can solve that. It doesn't solve the problem at all. It distracts you from it for a while, or it numbs it for a while, but you're just post-dating a check. You're going to have to pay it eventually.
That resonates with me a lot, because 10, 11 years ago, I had spinal surgery and I was on morphine for 2 years. And that morphine, I didn't believe I could live without it.
Yeah.
But the damage it was causing me was ridiculous along the way. Yeah. All right, talk to me about when we look at certain illnesses that people get. You get heart disease. The heart disease, the doctor will say it's caused by X, Y, or Z. You have cancer that people have, and then they either have an operation or they have chemotherapy, radiotherapy. They go into remission. Sometimes it comes back, sometimes it doesn't. Let's think about the impact there versus the reversal opportunities that you've got of any of those types of illnesses, and then include into that diabetes.
Let's go back to cause. In order to solve a problem, you have to understand what caused the problem, right? So I'm going to suggest that the cause of almost all disease, whether that's mental health or physical health, is that there's a gap that's opened up between our biological evolution and our capacity for accelerating innovation. So we have made life so very different than our genes ever evolved for, that there's this gap, and that gap is where the disease happens. So as a good example, our ancestors lived with the reality of a pretty fascist Mother Nature who told you how it was going to be. This is what's in season. This is what the temperature's like. This is how it is. And they had to evolve traits that would let them get through that. So humans evolved the ability to process 3 different types of fuel. We can burn sugar, we can burn fat, and we can burn protein. And as long as you do those 3 things through the course of the year, you're doing the right things. But if you, for example, lived in a country that made carbohydrate foods completely separate from seasonality, and they were consistently and constantly available, and they were of poor quality, then what would happen is that your metabolic system would get broken, it would get damaged. And that would manifest in a number of different ways. That might be obesity, or it could be type 2 diabetes, or it could be Alzheimer's. But it's a matter of imbalance. It's a matter of, we evolved for a certain environment, and then we changed that environment so substantially that we've created most of our own pain. I would put the same thing around mental health. Like, think about the Queen Mother from your great country. Do you know what year she was born?
Was it 1902?
1900. 1900. So if you think about her life, 1900, by the time she's 20 years old, she has gone through the Spanish flu, which infected 1/3 of people on Earth. She's also gone through World War I. She's 20 years old. All right, she gets her way through her 20s. As she enters her 30s, she goes into the Great Slump or the Great Depression. All right, she gets through the Great Depression. As she enters her early 40s, she goes into World War II. And then as she gets into her mid-50s, she hits the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the world is going to be wiped out by nuclear war. That was the first half of her life. We in our various generations floating around at this particular time, what have we dealt with? We've dealt with 9/11. It was pretty tough. We've dealt with the war on terror and the war on drugs, and all those things took place over there. We live in the safest, most secure times in the history of humanity. We walk the streets safely. We know that we're going to eat food. We have shelter. We basically live with no real existential threat at all, except for the media, who's frightening us all the time about how scary life is when it really isn't. And we don't do very well in that situation. In fact, there was a book written, I can't think of his name now, but he wrote a book in like 1890 called Suicide. And in the book, he suggested that if there was a global conflict, if there was ever a full global conflict, that global suicide rates would just fall off a cliff, to mix a bad metaphor. And true to form, World War I comes along, suicide stops. And then it takes years for the suicide rates to climb back up again. Then World War II comes along, suicide stops. And it takes years for suicide to come back up again. Well, you know what just broke into the top 10 killers of America in the last 2 years? Suicide. And the top 10 killers in America account for 80% of all mortality. So that's a significant thing. We live in the safest times in the history of ever, and we are dealing with more anxiety, more depression, more addiction, more checking out, and more suicide than ever before. And that leads me to suggest that maybe an easier life isn't actually a better life.
Wow. So does that mean that those people that went through those times experiencing challenge and sense of having to work together, sense of community, sense of purpose, all of these things,
human condition,
were kind of order of the day? You didn't have to think about them. They were just forced upon you, and you embraced them.
You want to get a teenager to stop playing a video game? Make the game too easy.
Yeah.
In research for WILDFIT and for my book, The Evolution Gap, over the last 15 years, I've been visiting this hunter-gatherer tribe in East Africa. I visit them pretty much every year. I've developed a very warm friendship with the chief and his family, and it's a real honor. And so he and I have had many conversations, and I've interviewed him and members of the tribe in different ways. And so one day we're having this conversation, and I said, well, do you have depression? And, this is being done through translation, and they just don't have that word. So they can't ask that question. I go, well, could you reframe it? Ask it like this. Do they ever have really, really long-term sadness? That was the best I could come up with. And he says, oh, yeah. I mean, you could be sad for like 3 days. And I was like, why only 3 days? Because he goes, because then you get hungry. Because when you're living in a hunter-gatherer tribe, you do not have a society around you to coddle you, to allow you to develop a sense of entitlement. You just don't have that. You need to move your body. And as you pointed out earlier, on the days where you do work out, you feel good. Yes, That's how it works. On the days where you don't work out, you don't feel good. Well, when somebody's feeling sad, they don't tend to work out, and that gets perpetuated until we call it depression. Well, in their case, after 3 days, you're bloody hungry, you go hunting, and then you feel better. So my follow-up question is, well, do you guys have suicide? And again, they don't have that word. They don't know that word. So I explained, well, in our world, occasionally people end their own lives. And the chief, his reaction to that was incredible. They what? Like, he was shocked. And there was a guy, and I have this all on camera, by the way, just, for the sake of veracity here. There's a guy sleeping on an animal skin in the back of the cage. He's obviously not sleeping, because when he hears my question, he hears my statement that some people end their own lives, he belly laughs because he's certain that I'm kidding. They do what? And so then, and we'd spent that whole day, we'd been out collecting this very special wood that they turn into a pulp, and then they bake into a paste, and it's a kind of poison for hunting. And we've been doing that all day. And so all of a sudden he says to me, well, then how do they do it? Like, how do they do it? And I said, some people use guns. They don't have guns, but they understand their destructive power of one. And you should have seen, some people use guns, and he's like, wow, like, that's a horrific thought, which he's right. It is a horrific thought. And I go, and then some people jump off really high things. And that really got him. Like, he didn't like that at all, because that's one of their most common causes of death. They fall off trees, or they're hunting and they're looking for honey and what have you. And then I went, some people use poison, and no kidding. And we'd spent the whole day making poison that day. And he went, like, all right, well, if you're going to do it, that would be his choice. But it was fascinating watching him process that, because it's nothing that they'd ever considered before. And I would put to you that the reason is that the neurotransmitters that exist inside you and me and in everybody that we know evolved for that environment. In other words, the Hadzabe people, literally every single thing they do to gain pleasure is improving their odds of survival and procreation. Whereas the average person, by the time 11 o'clock in the morning rolls up, they've done 15 things for pleasure that were counterproductive to their success, happiness, and mental well-being.
That is, powerful and true.
Yeah.
How would you go about, what's the process that you would deploy to understand me and help to fix me? What would you do? Let's create a case study here that maybe we can work with. Maybe I'm telling you that I'm stressed out. I wouldn't say I'm depressed, but I'm stressed out. I'm frustrated. I'm losing the will to live sometimes. Work just seems to be just some overwhelming burden. I don't have any energy to go to the gym. Jim, what are you talking about, Jim? That's just not going to happen. I'll go for a walk if I have to. How do you get me on the road to thinking differently, and then starting to deploy an obviously to you, but to me, the patient, the client, whichever you want to call it, a strategy to fix me?
Yeah, there's a real interesting question on what end do you start with? Do you start at the symptomal level, like you're depressed or you're angry or you're thinking of checking out in some way, or do you start at the foundational level? And I think it has to do with how acute the situation is. So if you're in immediate acute pain, like you're a danger to yourself or you're a danger to your life, then we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to try and figure out what's going on there. And generally, the first place that I will look to there is the secondary gain or the ancillary benefit that you're getting from the victimization that you've created for yourself. This is a major thing. Many years ago, I met this woman, and she'd been suicidal. And the reason she'd been suicidal is that she'd been born missing half of her face, a significant birth defect, and the other side of her face wasn't aesthetically wonderful either. And by the time she was 30 years old, she'd had 30 surgeries. And if you've ever had one surgery, imagine having one every year. And so, of course, I bump into her, and she and I are having a conversation. And I ask her, I said, you mentioned that you were suicidal. And I'm curious, were you really suicidal? Because the statistics are pretty clear on this. Men kill themselves, and women try to kill themselves on the whole. I mean, some women are successful, but the attempt to success ratio is very different. So I wanted to know, were you serious about it, or was it a cry for help? She goes, oh, no, I was serious about it. How do you know? She goes, well, because I was using a gun. That's a pretty committed methodology. So I said, well, tell me what happened. And I'm sure you've seen this lots of times in any kind of mentoring or coaching kind of thing, but sometimes people like slide into a story that they're very comfortable telling. You can see that they've told it many times and it just rolls off their tongue. And she slides into this story. And I go, this is her victim story. This is the way she tells it. And she goes, well, I went to the store and I bought the gun, I got the ammunition, and I came home. I sat down in my chair and, I made sure nobody was home and stuff. And I loaded the gun and I put the gun to my head and I pulled the trigger and nothing happened. Now, just to back up for a moment, I'm very aware that society lives with social scripting, and we all think that we get to choose what we say to things. And I think one of the reasons that podcasts like this are really interesting is that we tend to ask atypical questions and push the limits of social scripting to some degree. But the fact is that if I told you that my cat just got hit by a car, you have basically no choice but to say, oh man, that's too bad, or some version of that.
Even though I don't give a shit.
Even if you don't. And so here's the kicker though. What are you supposed to say when somebody says, I pulled the gun, I pulled the trigger, nothing happened? You don't know this until it actually happens to you, but there is a social scripted response to it. And the social scripted response comes to you if you're in that situation. And here is the social scripted response. Oh my God, thank God you're still here. It's the thing you have to say something like that. It just comes out of you. You don't even know until it happens. But what that means is that every single time she's told this story, she's had somebody say, oh my God, I guess you're still here. How does that make her feel? It makes her feel loved. It makes her feel valuable. Her victim story is the only consistent path she has to love and appreciation and significance. That's it. So she's trapped in it. So in this case, I know that she's been using this story to get this emotional payback. And what I want to do is break the story. I don't want her telling it anymore. Not like that. So anyway, she says to me, and excuse the language here, listen to the response. She goes, I pulled the trigger, nothing happened. And I looked her straight in the face. I didn't miss a beat. And I said, wow, did you take that fucker back under warranty? And so what happened in that moment is that she's like, what the heck, like confusion. And in that moment of confusion, people are very coachable. They're very suggestible in that space. Now we end up having the most fascinating conversation where she explained to me that her therapist had told her that she could get over this stuff if she would just own the word ugly. And I'm like, oh my God, like that's like old 1980s brute force, terrible psychology. Like you don't want to own the word ugly. I said to her, hold on a second. When you walk down the street, do little kids stare at you all the time? She goes, of course they do. And I go, and I'll bet sometimes the parents like pull them away like you're a monster. And she goes, yeah, they do. And I go, so in that situation, who's ugly? And she goes, the parents. And I said, so ugly is a behavior? And she goes, yeah. I said, so you don't have to own it then, do you? 6 months later, she's living in Thailand. She has a boyfriend and she's teaching English. All the 3 goals she had stated were the ones she wanted to achieve, but she'd broken out of it. So, when there's an acute problem, yeah, sometimes you have to go in and do the psychology part of the coaching or mentoring or whatever it is. But for the vast majority of people, the place to start is here. It's water, it's air, and it's food. If you are putting the right things into the body operates properly, including the mind. And so what I would suggest is that where everybody wants to be told that they're going to get a personal evaluation, we're going to check your genome, we're going to check your blood type, we're going to figure out you. That's a very egocentric form of marketing. It's very, very effective, but you're a Homo sapien. You're a Homo sapien and you require the same vitamins and minerals and amino acids and fatty acids that I do and that everybody else does. And it doesn't matter what color their skin is. It doesn't matter what country they were born in. They all have those same requirements. If we work on satisfying those requirements effectively through behavioral change, not through brute force willpower, then they will feel better. So the short answer is that somebody who's got a mental health issue, if it's acute, I think you do have to deal with that acute behavior now if they might be a danger to themselves. In every other case, you start with the body's basic physical needs: air, water, food, affection, movement, sunlight, sleep.
Air, water, food, affection.
Affection, physical affection.
Okay.
Vitally important. If you have chimpanzees have very hierarchical, troop status, and you've seen them grooming each other, right? They do this. Well, what you might not know is that they only groom a chimpanzee of equal or greater social ranking in the troop. That means that the lowest ranking members of the troop, nobody grooms them, and they live the shortest lives. The being touched and getting that affection It lowers your cortisol levels. And I think that the reason for this is my own little evolutionary theory. I think that the reason for this is that, do you think anybody would be grooming anybody if there was a leopard over there? No, no way. But the minute the leopard's gone, we can resume the grooming behavior. So the grooming behavior lets you know that your environment is safe. And so does affection, and so does physical touch, and play fighting, and cuddling, and tickling, and sex, and all the various forms of physical touch. Hugely important to our mental well-being and our physical well-being.
Is it, if you were to break it down in terms of percentages, are they all equally as important as each other?
That's a really interesting distinction. I would put to you that they are all of equal importance, but of different urgencies. If you, for example, let's say we take a human being and we put them in a perfect environment with all the right nutrition. They get all the right stuff, no bad stuff, no glyphosate, no additives, no sweeteners. Like, it's perfect stuff. But we extract the vitamin C from their citrus foods or from the liver they're eating or whatever. That human's going to die. They're going to die never having had a chocolate bar, never having had ice cream, never having drank alcohol. Like, they're just going to die because they're missing something. But how long will it take? It'll take months. Whereas if we remove water from the room, days. And if we remove air from the room, hours or minutes, I should say. So what I would say is that you look at it first in terms of urgency. The number one urgency is breathing, and breathing good quality air and changing the breathing patterns. Like, you see all these people with the vapes? Like, I hate to break it to them, but it's the addiction is about a breathing pattern. It's not about the substance in the vape. You know, you try it out yourself. If you look at the way somebody vapes or smokes, what do? They go, trip, trip. Everybody feels better when they do that. Like, literally everybody. And why? Because if you're in the wilderness and there's a threat near you, then how do you breathe? Quietly, very shallow and quietly. The minute the danger is gone, what do? You go, oh. That's what they're addicted to. And so the first thing is to make sure you're breathing good quality air and breathing deeply on a regular basis, because those deep breaths tell your DNA you're safe. Then water, and then movement, and then sunlight and sleep. And then at that point, the urgency starts to drop down, but the importance never does.
So the reason I asked that question is I can imagine the people that are watching or listening to this right now thinking, well, hold on, as a percentage, I'm lonely, I live alone, I'm not in a relationship. If it was, let's say 20%, I can only be 80% whole, almost. And so that to me gives them an opportunity for get out.
Sure. Yeah, sure. What we have to do, I believe, with any of these things is we have to find the very best way to solve the problem. So let's say, for example, somebody's low on vitamin D. Very common, very, very common thing. Somebody's low on vitamin D.
Pictures of Elon Musk and Zuckerberg out on yachts or in the sun a couple of months ago, and they look almost translucent skin.
Yeah.
And it's like they don't get any vitamin D at all.
Yeah, exactly. So we know that there's a vitamin D problem. So what should people do? Well, they should make sure that they are eating good food so they have all the right precursors, because that way when they go in the sun, they will create their own vitamin D. But what if they live in England? Like I was in England. There was this one day in England. It was really sunny. You probably remember that day. The reality is
6 days of summer every year.
There you go. And so the challenge is that if you're living in England, that particular solution isn't really available to you on a regular basis. Therefore, you're probably going to have to supplement. So what I would say is, now you take somebody who says, well, they're living alone, and so they don't have somebody, and they're frustrated because Tinder just doesn't seem to work for them. All right, fair enough, but that doesn't mean they can't go for a massage. It doesn't mean they can't get a pet. It doesn't mean they don't have friends that they can be affectionate with. And I tell you, I got such a lesson in this, because when the pandemic kind of began, I had arrived home, and my wife and I were kind of going through a separation, and she called me. She goes, I want to take our daughter on this boat cruise. And I go, you can't go on a boat cruise. The world's about to come to an end. She decided to go on the boat cruise, and guess what? She got locked out there. So now I'm at home in our huge place by myself for 4 months. By myself, like total isolation for 4 months. And about, I guess, somewhere into the third month, I started developing some I don't know, pain in my shoulders and knees, like something just wasn't right. I didn't know what to do about it. And a friend of mine recommended me to an osteopath who was willing to come over to the house. So the osteopath came. This is the first human being that I've seen in 2.5 months. Osteopath comes into the house. I have a massage bed in the house. So I lay down on the massage bed and she comes on and she puts her hands on my lower back and my eyes started watering. I wasn't really crying, but I was crying. It was the first human to touch me in 2.5 months. The fact is it doesn't need to be somebody that you love. It just needs to be physical contact. So go get a massage, like go get a pet and have a cat in that. Well, cats aren't affectionate enough. Maybe a dog. I'm kidding, cat people. But the point is that with each of these needs, what we need to do is find the best possible source that we can, even if the best one isn't available. If the sun isn't available, get a vitamin D pill. If real affection isn't available, go get a massage. Go, do something else that's going to get you there, because those are needs. They're not optional.
When we then look at those types of things, how do we know? How do we know the formula that we need to use? How would I know? You sit down and telling me these things, and this makes a whole load of sense. So thanks, Eric. I appreciate that. Now I'm going to crack on and get on with my day and forget everything because I don't know what the actual process is. And this is where I'm going to get stuck, because unless somebody gives me the recipe and how to measure it all out and do it, I'm going to find my way of probably not making the cake at all, let alone having a bad attempt at it.
So I would say that to the very best of our ability, what we want to do is duplicate the sort of lifestyle that our ancestors lived to some degree. Like, I'm not saying we should all sell all our stuff and go live in the forest. I mean, that's a great option, but it's not practical. There you go. But I think that we can learn from that. So, for example, your eyes are blue. No, I can't see in the bright lights. Hazel, they're light. So you're from sort of like, mid-northern Europe, roughly speaking. That's more about you than me, I can tell you. Whereas my eyes are darker, so I'm probably from more southern Europe. And based on my eye and skin color and hair color, I can tell roughly where on the planet your ancestors are from. Why? Well, because our ancestors evolved lighter skin the further away from the sun they moved. Mm-hmm. And that's true whether they moved north or south of the equator. When Europeans first arrived in South Africa, they met the Hottentots and the Khoisan, who are yellow. They're very light in color. In fact, they're so light in color that when apartheid came to an end and they were doing this like wealth redistribution thing, they were too light to qualify for the programs. Like they're very light in color. Yeah. And of course, if you go north, the northern hemisphere is tilted slightly further away. You get to Norway, you get to Estonia, you're talking about translucent people.
Yeah.
Why? Because the sun is unbelievably important to your health. And so if your skin is too dark in a place where there's not enough sun, then you don't get enough sunlight, you don't produce enough vitamin D, and you don't get the antimicrobial benefit of the sun. So you, over multiple generations, as you're moving north, your skin evolves lighter and lighter. Now, that's evolution. The gap is where you now move in a few hours as far as it used to take generations to move. So you move from Nigeria to Estonia on a flight. That used to take like generations to get there. So now you've got this Nigerian person in Estonia and they're not getting enough sunlight. And what's going to happen? They're going to get seasonal affective disorder. Their children are going to develop rickets. It's going to be bad. Equally, if we take that Estonian and we bring them to Nigeria, they're going to get fried to a crisp, right? So what I'm suggesting is that there are telltale signs. If you don't have a little bit of color on your skin, if you don't have a little color on your skin, like if you're Caucasian, you're not getting enough sunlight. The sun, by the way, did not suddenly become dangerous in 1962. Some marketing people got a hold of the idea that the sun became dangerous because it was going to help them to sell sunblock. Now, I'm not saying all sunblock is evil, but what I am suggesting is that if the sun really did suddenly become this monstrous, evil, dangerous thing that was causing skin cancer, why only humans? Why not elephants and hippos and leaves? What about all the leaves that are in the sun the whole time? So somehow the sun became dangerous only to human beings? No. What happened is that we started living indoors and wearing clothing all the time and then going out and getting unhealthy levels of sun in a moment. What we want to do is duplicate a more natural relationship with the sun. You know what hunter-gatherers do between like 11 and 1 o'clock in the afternoon? They stay out of the sun. They go nap under a tree. They don't go and bake themselves with oil to get a tan. They just naturally get sun on their skin. And I think In each of these cases, once you have balance, and unfortunately most people are way out of balance, once you have balance, you can listen to your body. Here's an example. Drinking water should not be about addressing thirst. It should be about preventing it, right? We should be drinking water preemptively. Well, when you're in balance and you're not full of caffeinated soda drinks and all that kind of stuff, you have an honest relationship with your body's sense of thirst, you're more inclined to drink water. When you throw it out of balance and you're drinking all these like sort of artificial things, now your thirst is twisted and you're generally running dehydrated all the time. What's the answer? It's not to say you have to give up all those things. It's just to make sure you are drinking water.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what I think the biggest problem is. The biggest problem really is that the conditioning that we've grown up with. Like the food industry hijacked our emotional states. They hijacked our holidays. The general progression of technology has made us incredibly lazy. I was in LA a couple of weeks ago, and there was a gym on the second floor of the strip mall, and there was an escalator going up to the gym. That really says a lot to me about the state of where we are today. And so our job is to resist those things. It's to not take the escalator. It's to go, when I fly all the time, I never take those things. The only time I take them is if I just have an impractical number of bags to walk up the stairs with. That's it. Otherwise, I'm taking those. I'm trying to duplicate that natural lifestyle as best possible, closing the gap. And when you do that, your body goes into balance. And you know what's really crazy is your cravings start to make sense. Your cravings for exercise start to make sense. Your cravings for food start to make sense. Your cravings for water start to make sense. And you do start to be able to listen to your body.
I have someone in my family that's doesn't have diabetes, but what does it say? Pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
They're pre-diabetic, and they've been told that they're pre-diabetic, but I don't see them doing anything to address what they might address to try and fix it. And they're kind of just slowly going down the path of accepting it as part of their life.
Yeah.
Which is, I'm sure, what a lot of people do. Doctor said you're pre-diabetic. They've not said, here's a solution so you don't get it. It's just it's slowly going to come to be more responsible. What do you make of the doctors that say that? And what do you make of the opportunities for people to solve that problem? And what should they actually be doing?
I'm going to start with, I believe that diabetes is the single greatest threat to existence at the moment. Like it is the single most dangerous thing that's happening on the planet right now. Now, one might argue that, nuclear power and terrorism and biowarfare might be just as bad. It could be. But I would put to you that there would never have been a COVID pandemic if we didn't have prolific levels of diabetes and obesity. It just wouldn't have happened. There weren't enough. You need a certain number of sick people in the population in order for the disease to jump. Countries that had under 18% obesity barely did COVID. Their COVID deaths were lower than their traffic deaths throughout the entire period. The minute the country had 18% obesity and diabetes, which is roughly 1 in 5 people, they had enough people to spread the disease. We should be addressing that as the number one concern of society at the moment, because the next pandemic that's come along is going to look. You have your own personal immunity, but you have community immunity, right? And community immunity is the ultimate wall. Do you know that when they test women for the men that they're attracted to naturally by pheromones, women are naturally attracted to men who have strong immunity where they have weak immunity, because they're creating a stronger immunity wall, right? And theoretically, they're going to breed children with stronger immunity. And what's really funny about that is the way they did that test is they had men work out and get sweaty in their shirts, and then they put the sweaty shirts in these like containers and they let them stew for a bit. And then they had the women come and smell all the shirts and determine which of the shirts they found attractive, never seeing the men. And in 80% of occasions, they chose men that had complementary immune systems, supportive immune systems. In other words, strong where they were weak and weak where they were strong. In the 20% that they didn't, they couldn't figure out right away why that was to begin with. It was because they were on the pill. And their hormones were messed up, so they were no longer able to smell according to instinct. Wow. Now, the reason I mention this is that diabetes is a modern problem, and it's a problem of a broken food system and a problem of lack of seasonality. It's a problem of seed oils and prolific carbohydrates and sedentary lifestyle, all combined into a terrible storm. And we're now dealing with, one in 3 Americans have diabetes, and half are on the diabetic spectrum. And I'd say 7 out of 10 of them are under threat. It's a serious, serious disease. Plus, it's the number one risk factor for cancer. It's the number one risk factor for heart disease. It likely means you lose your eyesight. You probably lose fingers, toes, feet, and hands. It's a serious, serious disease. Problem number one is that doctors don't tell people that. So you walk in and they go, oh, you're pre-diabetic. So they told your friend you're pre-diabetic. What does it mean? It just means that you need to think about sugar. Like that's the conversation.
Yeah.
They don't say to you, listen, you're pre-diabetic, which means you're trending toward full-blown diabetes. What that means is that your blood has too much sugar in it and it's getting sticky and it's going to cause circulatory problems. That's going to cause you to lose your eyesight. It's going to cause you to lose limbs. It's also going to give you the most incredible uptick in the likelihood of developing a variety of cancers and heart disease. It is a terminal disease ultimately. And if they said that to you, you'd probably become real curious about fixing it.
Yeah,
but they don't.
You'd shit yourself, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
That'd be your natural response.
Yeah, so that's problem number one. Then problem number two is that now doctors are in three camps, right? There's camp number one, which is doctors that still buy the old narrative, which is that it's a chronic disease that must be managed. And most of what you'll see written out there is about managing diabetes. You don't need to manage it; you need to reverse it. But most of the doctors are still towing that, and it's not their fault. It's what they were taught. In fact, I'll get to the other two, but I'll just say this: Ruben Ruiz. He was the co-author of my book, Post Diabetes. The reason he's the co-author of the book is that he contacted me and he told me this story that in 1 week he'd been in 2 car accidents after stopping, in both cases, after stopping at Starbucks to get himself a coffee because he was so tired. He got in 2 car accidents because he was so tired and fell asleep behind the wheel. Why was he so tired? Well, he was so tired because he was hypertensive, 40 pounds overweight, type 2 diabetic, and on 10 prescription medications. No wonder he was tired.
Yeah.
So after the second car accident, he thinks to himself, what business do I have being a doctor? What business? I can't even heal thyself. He goes online, he finds one of our master classes, he goes through one of our 3-month coaching programs, and at the end of that 3 months, he's dropped 40 pounds. He's no longer type 2 diabetic. He's no longer hypertensive, and he's off 9 of his 10 prescription medications. It took a few months to get off the 10th one. And then he contacted me and he says, I used to be an assistant professor of medicine at UCLA. Nobody told me this. Nobody told me that these conditions were reversible. They told me that we could kind of manage them better with lifestyle revision. Nobody told me they were reversible. And we have to get this message out to the world. And that's why we co-authored the book together. So diabetes, the other 2 camps of the doctors, the one where the camp he was in, right? The camp of it's something you have to manage for the rest of your life. He was in that camp. Then there's another camp of the doctors that vaguely know you can improve it. And they kind of give you, well, if you just, cut down your sugar a little, you might be able to avoid type 2 diabetes. And that's about the extent of the advice that they give. And then there's the third camp. And the third camp are the doctors that are proactively informing their clients, hey, this can be reversed and you can do something about this. But even they have a problem. And the problem is that people won't do it. You can give them all the rules. Eat this, don't eat that, eat this, don't eat that. And they will stick with it for maybe 10 days. And then they'll start making an exception. And then they'll make another exception. And then they'll come back for their next checkup and their A1C is even worse. And that is the piece that we unlocked. We figured out the behavioral psychology that actually gets people to make the changes. And that's why we have so many reversal cases, because we work with those level 3 doctors. Ruben became one of them. We work with them and say, here's the deal. You have to frighten the clients enough because you have to tell them what diabetes really is. Then you have to give them hope because there actually is hope. And then you have to give them a structure. And that's what we give them, that structure, the day-by-day incremental structure, understanding their relationship with food, understanding how to change it, and then creating a permanent lifestyle change instead of a diet.
So basically what we have is a food industry that wants to sell more food, so it doesn't want you to be wise to what they're trying to do. So you're being marketed one way and you're being seduced by that. We have this increased level of obesity that's taking place around the world, in most countries in fairness, and staggeringly high rates compared to where they used to be. And then the diabetes or the pre-diabetes comes because there's such a massively growing population of people that are in that way. Telling them what to do doesn't fix it, because you're right, making the exception. I think that's really that really hit home as you said that to me. It's like making the exception.
Yeah,
it's like. Come on, it's just that, it's a vanilla latte or whatever it may be that's the exception, and then there's one every couple of days.
There's something very cool about that exception, and I want to share it with you because it can actually help people right here, right now. The way that works, The way that works is with what we in WILDFIT, we call the food angel and the food devil. So you know the angel and the devil on the shoulder. So here's what happens is that your friend knows that they have to make some changes. So we give them the rules. And then they start trying to follow those rules. And they stick with them for like a week, 6, 7 days, 8 days. And then they go to work one day and they find out that Jimmy brought donuts, right? So here's what happens. They walk in and the food devil goes, Jimmy brought donuts. And the food angel goes, yeah, but we're on a diet. And the food devil goes, yeah, but you've been so good. You've been so good. You deserve it. And the angel's like, don't talk to me like that. I'm trying to, we made a commitment. We need to stick with it. Just one. Now that dialogue, we all have it.
Yep.
We all have it. And we have different personalities of the dialogue. That one is the sultry, seductive one. But then there's the drug dealer one. It's like, well, just have one bite. You don't have to finish it. It's free anyway. It's that kind of thing. And then you've got the whiny teenage voice. So it's like, oh, come on. We've been so good. One donut won't hurt. We got to live. But we have those voices. And what's really fascinating is, and this is a big part of the work that we do, once you've identified those voices and you hear them consciously, the pattern is interrupted and you give yourself what we call, named after Viktor Frankl, we call it a Frankl moment, a moment of inserted consciousness. And that's what many people need. They find themselves eating things that they didn't even decide to eat. But if we can give them that moment of consciousness where they're, you're walking through the Dubai Mall here and you smell Cinnabon and the food devil goes, hey, they've got Cinnabon. And you go, so what? Like you're done. The dialogue can be broken. And that's just like one area of psychology that if you change that for somebody, and I'll bet you will get people right to you and go, after that episode with Eric, I was walking along and I heard my food devil say to me that there was this food was free or this food was yummy or that I deserved it. And then I didn't do it. That's the beginning of transformation.
When we look at corporate culture and dealing with this type of problem, I find lots of companies struggle. They want to try and do good things. And so there'll be, there'll be bowls of fruit in the office reception. There'll be a healthy eating selection in the office canteen. There will be personal trainers to offer online programs for people to work out. There'll be different kind of like wellness activities, a steps challenge this week or whatever it may be, to try and get people in the kind of like right frame of mind to do stuff. At the end of the day, the company has shareholders, the shareholders who have to be reported to, and the idea is you bring the value of the company up by and make the shareholders happy. We all know that. The shareholders don't really care whether Maureen is obese or pre-diabetic or not, and the company's just trying to think of different ways it can do just to keep people engaged. That's not going to transform anything. Yeah. What I noticed, because I did it 8 years ago, I literally had fruit bowls in each of the offices full every Monday morning of bananas and apples and oranges.
That's a great way to put everybody to sleep.
Well, do you see what happened? They were all gone by the end of the day. People were putting 6 or 7 bananas in their bags and taking them home. It was just like, how much money are we spending on fruit? But these things don't transform massively. It's kind of like, but the company wants their staff to perform. That's really what they want. They want their staff to, stay at the company longer. They want to be engaged in their work. They want to be inspired by what they do. They want
be sick less often.
Better results. Sorry?
Be sick less often.
Be sick less often. And that's another thing. Staff retention issues in businesses. One in 5 leave every year in this country. Okay. And so 20% of your workforce leaves. So if you and I have got 200 people working for us, then losing 20% of our people every year, okay, it's colossal for reasons that we could have dealt with.
Yeah.
Okay. After the fact, it's too late. And then the cost of replacing that person isn't the salary. It's everything else that goes with it. Obviously, the HR department, the recruitment fees, and the new resident visa, it all goes on and on and on. What companies need to solve, okay, is these, with obesity growing, their employees getting bigger and bigger and bigger, how they can install a system into that business that people buy into that helps them, which then indirectly helps the business.
Well,
so how do you then talk to, or would you talk to a CEO, a CFO, or a HR department about this problem, and what kind of strategy could you think about deploying to fix that?
There's a clue in what you already said, and that is that you have to have their buy-in. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen in these corporate wellness programs is that, somebody at the high on, up in the upper echelons of the business has decided that there's going to be a corporate wellness thing, and they announce it to everybody. We have a new corporate wellness thing. We put a gym in for you, and there's going to be fruit bowls, and this is the way it's going to be. And there's no real buy-in to that. And so, employees largely already are being told what to do with their time. They're not looking for one more thing to be told to do. So that's not very functional. In fact, and this is probably a terrible metaphor, but employees are not so dissimilar from children in the way you manage them. What I mean by that is that if you give your children rules, they will find a way to break them. And employees aren't so different about that. So what we have found to be really successful, first of all, is that any wellness program that you put out to the employees has to be voluntary. It has to be something they opt into. It can't be dictated to them. It just doesn't work. So that's the first thing. So then the question is, how do you opt them into that? Well, in our case, the way we do that is we'd send one of our coaches to actually speak to everybody. Like super inspirational talk. We'd have them really understand what was going on. And by the end of that talk, the employees would want to do it. And that's immediately, that's half the battle right there. Half the battle. I've seen so many wellness programs simply fail because the employees didn't care. But if you can get them inspired and they want to do it, then everything changes. Then the next step is not to just hand them a bunch of rules and go, here's your wellness program. If you do that, you're asking for too much transformation too quickly. It's frog in the hot water problem, right? They're just going to jump out. Instead, what you want to do is have a program that gives them a series of incremental lifestyle changes slowly over time so that the habits are created. So funny enough, my very first corporate deployment was actually my publisher before they were my publisher. And the CEO of Mind Valley did our program, and he shared his before and after pictures on the internet, and it just caused us to blow up. Like everybody wanted to come do the program. But he came to me one day and he goes, I want to run my team through the program. I think it was 100 or maybe 200 staff, and he wanted to run them all through the program. Well, what ended up happening was, because they'd all been involved in producing my programs, like many of them had been involved in preparing marketing materials, they'd seen me speaking, so they were very excited about this. They had buy-in. They were excited about me joining the publisher, and they had buy-in. So now they go through the program, incremental changes, adjusted, beautifully over the space of 3 months. And by the end of that 3 months, they had transformation stories off the charts. And one of the things they told me is that at their company get-together and parties, their booze bill was like cut into a tiny fraction. Now, at no point do we tell people they can't drink anymore. But what happened is that as they got more in balance with their bodies, they just didn't want to so much. So at their own parties, immediately their ROI was right there. They were like just on booze savings alone. But then the real stuff started coming in, the huge weight loss stories, the increased productivity stories, the diabetes reversal stories, and so on. Now, what do you think happens? In wave 2, the employees that didn't opt in are like, can we now do that? Right? And that's the way to do it. You need your pioneering bought-in group. And those people are going to become the beacon of hope that's going to get the rest of the team on. And that works. It works beautifully.
Perfect. Eric, it's been great chatting to you. You're such an inspirational guy that's got such wisdom, and I think that everyone's going to really enjoy listening to what you've got to say. So thanks for coming to join us on the show today.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. It's been fun.